In 1936, while most economists celebrated Keynes' general theory as revolutionary, I saw something they missed entirely: the complete destruction of economic science itself. Keynes didn't solve unemployment. He created an intellectual framework that would generate decades of economic chaos disguised as sophisticated policy. The fundamental disagreement between us wasn't about technical details of interest rates or liquidity preferences. It was about whether economics is a logical science based on human action or merely sophisticated justification for government intervention. While Keynes promised politicians they could spend their way to prosperity, I demonstrated why such promises violate the basic laws of economic reality. Today, as America drowns in federal debt and artificial stimulus, understanding this crucial intellectual battle isn't academic luxury. It's essential for grasping why Keynesian policies always fail and what genuine economic recovery requires. The truth that made me Keynes' greatest intellectual enemy was simple: government cannot create wealth, only redistribute and destroy it. Chapter 1: The Fundamental Error That Corrupted Modern Economics. The core difference between my approach and Keynes wasn't methodological preference. It was the choice between economic science and economic sophistry. Keynes built his entire system on a fatal premise: that human action in the aggregate operates by different laws than individual human action. This violates the most basic principle of praxeology, that all economic phenomena emerge from individual human choices pursuing subjective ends through scarce means. When Keynes spoke of aggregate demand and propensity to consume, he committed the fallacy of treating statistical abstractions as if they were causal forces. But aggregate demand doesn't exist independently of the individual demands that compose it. There is no mysterious entity called the economy that can be manipulated through fiscal policy. There are only millions of individual actors making choices based on their personal knowledge and circumstances. Keynes' liquidity preference theory exemplifies this methodological error. He treated money holding as if it were driven by psychological propensities rather than logical action aimed at specific ends. But individuals don't hold money due to abstract liquidity preference. They hold it because money serves their particular purposes in an uncertain world. Cash holdings represent individual plans for future action, not aggregate psychological states that governments can manipulate. The employment theory reveals the deepest flaw in Keynesian thinking. Keynes argued that economies could reach equilibrium with persistent unemployment, requiring government intervention to restore full employment. This ignores the fundamental truth that unemployment results from wage rates set above their market clearing levels. When government prevents wages from adjusting to market conditions, whether through minimum wage laws, union privileges, or unemployment benefits, it creates the very unemployment it claims to solve. My analysis demonstrated that genuine full employment emerges naturally when markets are allowed to clear. Entrepreneurs constantly seek profitable opportunities, including hiring workers at wages that make their employment economically viable. Government intervention doesn't create jobs, it prevents the market adjustments that would eliminate unemployment naturally. This methodological difference had profound implications. Where Keynes saw market failure requiring government correction, I saw government interference preventing market solutions. Where he saw insufficient aggregate demand, I saw the inevitable consequences of previous government interventions distorting the structure of production. Chapter 2: Why Keynesian Stimulus Always Backfires. Keynesian stimulus policies appear to work initially because they create the illusion of economic activity while disguising their destructive effects. When government increases spending during a recession, it does generate immediate employment and income for those who receive the new government contracts and payments. Keynes pointed to this visible effect as proof of his theory's correctness. But this commits the classic fallacy of seeing only what is seen while ignoring what is unseen. Every dollar the government spends during stimulus must come from somewhere. If it's borrowed, those funds are diverted from private investment that would have created genuine wealth. If it's printed, The monetary expansion distorts the price system and creates artificial boom conditions that must eventually bust. If it's taxed, it directly reduces private spending and investment. In each case, government stimulus doesn't create net new economic activity, it redirects resources from productive private use to politically determined government use. The crucial difference lies in economic calculation. Private investors risk their own money and profit only by satisfying genuine consumer demands efficiently. This process directs resources toward their most valuable uses as determined by voluntary market transactions. Government spending, by contrast, operates without genuine profit and loss feedback. Politicians and bureaucrats spend other people's money on projects chosen for political rather than economic reasons. Consider what happens during a typical Keynesian stimulus program. Government announces massive infrastructure spending to create jobs and boost aggregate demand. The immediate effect appears positive: construction workers find employment, equipment suppliers receive orders, and economic statistics show increased activity. But this visible activity masks several destructive effects. First, the resources used for these projects are diverted from alternative uses that would have better served consumer preferences. The steel, concrete, and labor used for politically chosen infrastructure cannot simultaneously be used for privately chosen projects that might have created more genuine value. Second, government borrowing to finance stimulus drives up interest rates, crowding out private investment that would have created lasting productive capacity. The temporary government jobs disappear when the stimulus ends, but the private investment that was crowded out never materializes. Third, stimulus programs create economic dependencies and political constituencies that demand continuation regardless of economic results. What begins as temporary crisis response becomes permanent government involvement in the economy. The long-term effect is reduced economic growth, higher government debt, and increased political control over economic activity. The recession that stimulus was supposed to cure gets prolonged and deepened by the very policies designed to end it. Chapter 3: The interest rate manipulation that guarantees boom and bust. Perhaps no aspect of the Mises-Keynes debate reveals their fundamental differences more clearly than their theories of interest rates. Keynes treated interest as merely the price of money, determined by liquidity preference and capable of manipulation by central banks to achieve full employment. This superficial view ignores the profound coordinating function that interest rates serve in a market economy. Interest rates are not arbitrary prices that governments can set at will. They represent the market's evaluation of time preference, the universal human tendency to value present goods more highly than future goods of the same kind. This time preference coordinates production across time, ensuring that current consumption and future investment maintain proper balance according to voluntary individual choices. When I developed Austrian business cycle theory, I demonstrated how artificial credit expansion distorts this coordination mechanism. When central banks lower interest rates below their natural market level, they send false signals throughout the economy. Entrepreneurs receive artificial encouragement to undertake longer-term, more capital-intensive projects that appear profitable only because cheap credit makes them seem viable. Observe how this process unfolds in contemporary America. The Federal Reserve lowers interest rates to stimulate the economy. Real estate developers suddenly find massive construction projects profitable because they can borrow cheaply. Technology companies launch ambitious expansion plans financed by low-cost debt. Consumers take on larger mortgages and increase spending financed by credit cards and home equity loans. This artificial boom creates the illusion of prosperity, exactly as Keynesian theory predicts. Employment rises, GDP statistics improve, and politicians claim credit for their wise stimulus policies. But the prosperity is illusory because it's based on malinvestment, the allocation of resources to projects that would not be profitable under genuine market interest rates. The inevitable correction comes when reality reasserts itself. The artificially stimulated projects require more resources to complete than originally calculated. Inflation begins rising as excessive money creation bids up prices. The central bank faces pressure to raise interest rates to control inflation. As interest rates rise toward market levels, the malinvested projects become obviously unprofitable. The result is recession, not a mysterious failure of aggregate demand, but the necessary liquidation of investments that never should have been undertaken. The longer and more intensive the artificial boom, the more severe the eventual bust must be. This is why Keynesian stimulus doesn't prevent business cycles, it guarantees them. The tragic irony is that Keynesian economists typically respond to these recessions by recommending more of the same medicine that caused them. They call for lower interest rates, more government spending, and additional stimulus to restore aggregate demand. This perpetuates the boom-bust cycle while gradually weakening the economy's capacity for genuine growth. Chapter 4: How Keynes Destroyed the Concept of Economic Law. The most destructive aspect of Keynesian economics wasn't any particular policy recommendation, it was the fundamental assault on the concept of economic law itself. Classical economists understood that economic phenomena operate according to logical laws derived from human nature. Just as water flows downhill according to physical laws, human action follows logical patterns that constitute economic laws. Keynes shattered this understanding by treating economic relationships as historically contingent psychological propensities that could be altered through policy intervention. His concepts of animal spirits, liquidity traps, and paradox of thrift suggested that normal economic reasoning could be suspended during special circumstances requiring government management. Consider the profound implications of this methodological revolution. If economic laws are merely psychological tendencies rather than logical necessities, then government intervention becomes not just possible but necessary. Politicians and bureaucrats are transformed from obstacles to market coordination into essential managers of aggregate psychology. This opened the floodgates to unlimited government intervention justified by increasingly sophisticated economic theories. If consumer confidence is low, government must boost it through fiscal stimulus. If investment is insufficient, monetary policy must encourage it through low interest rates. If unemployment persists, minimum wage laws and union privileges become economic necessities rather than market distortions. The result has been the progressive abandonment of economic logic in favor of political expediency. Contemporary economic policy operates on the assumption that any problem can be solved through appropriate government intervention guided by macroeconomic models. The idea that government intervention might be the cause rather than the cure of economic problems becomes literally unthinkable within the Keynesian framework. My approach, by contrast, treats economic laws as logical necessities derived from the universal characteristics of human action. Individuals act purposefully to improve their circumstances using scarce means to achieve subjective ends. From this simple axiom, we can derive logical laws governing exchange, production, distribution, and coordination that operate regardless of historical circumstances or psychological states. These laws reveal why Keynesian interventions must fail. You cannot create wealth by printing money because wealth consists of real goods and services, not paper symbols. You cannot eliminate scarcity by increasing demand because scarcity results from the fundamental relationship between unlimited wants and limited resources. You cannot coordinate production by disrupting price signals because prices communicate essential information about relative scarcities and preferences. When government violates these economic laws, the consequences are as inevitable as physical laws. Minimum wage laws create unemployment. Rent control creates housing shortages. Price controls create black markets. Monetary expansion creates inflation. These aren't unfortunate side effects that can be managed through better policy design. they are logical necessities that follow from the nature of human action. The tragedy is that Keynesian economics has convinced several generations of economists, politicians, and citizens that these logical necessities can be overcome through sufficiently clever government intervention. Chapter 5: The Mathematical Illusion That Seduced a Generation. Nothing reveals the fundamental corruption of modern economics more clearly than its obsession with mathematical formalism borrowed from physics. Keynes himself wasn't particularly mathematical, but his successors transformed his insights into elaborate mathematical models that created an illusion of scientific precision while obscuring basic logical errors. The seduction of mathematics in economics stems from a misunderstanding of what makes science scientific. Physical sciences use mathematics because they deal with constant quantitative relationships between measurable phenomena. The gravitational constant remains the same across time and space, allowing precise mathematical prediction of planetary motions. Human action operates by entirely different principles. Economic phenomena emerge from purposeful human choices that cannot be reduced to mathematical constants. When an individual decides whether to buy a house, the decision depends on countless subjective factors, personal preferences, family circumstances, expectations about the future, available alternatives that resist mathematical quantification. Observe how this mathematical obsession distorts economic understanding. Keynesian economists construct elaborate models with precise coefficients for marginal propensities to consume, multiplier effects, and elasticities of substitution. These models generate specific numerical predictions about the effects of fiscal and monetary policies. When the predictions prove wrong, the response is not to question the mathematical approach but to build more complex models with additional variables and interactions. This process transforms economics from logical analysis of human action into sophisticated curve-fitting exercises. Economists become technicians manipulating statistical relationships rather than scientists understanding causal processes. The fundamental questions: why do people act? How do markets coordinate? What causes economic growth? Disappear beneath layers of mathematical sophistication. The practical consequences are devastating. Policymakers receive seemingly precise recommendations backed by impressive mathematical models. A 2% increase in government spending will increase GDP by 1.5%. A 0.25% reduction in interest rates will create 200,000 jobs. These specific predictions create false confidence in government's ability to fine-tune economic performance. When reality fails to conform to mathematical predictions, the blame falls on insufficient data, unexpected shocks, or inadequate model specifications rather than the fundamental impossibility of treating human action as if it were mechanical motion. The mathematical apparatus becomes self-justifying. Failures prove the need for more sophisticated mathematics rather than abandonment of the mathematical approach. My praxeological method offers the only genuine scientific approach to economics. Instead of seeking mathematical precision, we derive logical implications from the self-evident fact that humans act purposefully. These logical relationships are absolutely certain, unlike statistical correlations that may change without notice. For example, we can state with certainty that price controls below market clearing levels will create shortages. This isn't a probabilistic prediction based on historical data, it's a logical necessity derived from the nature of human action. When prices are prevented from rising to eliminate excess demand, some of that demand must remain unsatisfied. Similarly, we know with logical certainty that monetary expansion will redistribute wealth from later to earlier recipients of new money. This follows necessarily from the fact that new money enters the economy at specific points and spreads gradually throughout the system, affecting different prices at different times. Chapter 6: Why the Market Always Knows Better Than Government. The central planning debate between myself and Keynes ultimately reduces to a fundamental question: can government possess the knowledge necessary to improve upon market outcomes? Keynes assumed that enlightened policymakers armed with macroeconomic theory could correct market failures and optimize economic performance. This assumption reveals a profound misunderstanding of the knowledge problem in economics. Market prices emerge from millions of individual decisions based on personal knowledge that no central authority could ever possess. When a farmer decides which crops to plant, he considers local soil conditions, weather patterns, available equipment, labor costs, expected demand, and countless other factors specific to his situation. When consumers decide what to buy, they evaluate personal preferences, budget constraints, available alternatives, and future plans that only they fully understand. The price system coordinates these billions of individual decisions without any central direction. Prices communicate essential information about relative scarcities and demands, enabling individuals to adjust their plans in response to changes in circumstances they might never directly observe. When oil becomes scarcer, rising prices automatically encourage conservation and stimulate exploration without any government mandate. Keynesian macroeconomic management attempts to override this coordination mechanism through aggregate manipulation. Instead of allowing millions of individual adjustments to restore equilibrium after economic shocks, government intervenes with fiscal and monetary policies designed to achieve predetermined aggregate targets for employment, inflation, and growth. This approach assumes that government officials can possess better information than market participants about optimal resource allocation. But where would this superior knowledge come from? Government officials don't experience the direct profit and loss consequences of their decisions. They don't have personal stake in efficiently satisfying consumer demands. They operate through political processes that reward different behaviors than market processes. Consider the contrast between market discovery and government planning in contemporary America. When consumers began preferring smartphones over traditional computers, market entrepreneurs rapidly shifted resources toward mobile technology. Companies that adapted quickly prospered, those that didn't declined. This process required no central coordination or planning. It emerged spontaneously from profit-seeking behavior guided by changing consumer preferences expressed through voluntary purchases. Government technology policy, by contrast, operates through political processes that are inherently less responsive to consumer preferences. Politicians support technologies based on lobbying pressure, regional employment concerns, and ideological preferences rather than efficiency in satisfying consumer demands. The result is massive subsidies for politically favored technologies like solar panels and electric vehicles regardless of their economic viability. The knowledge problem extends beyond technical information to include knowledge of values and preferences. Market prices reflect the subjective valuations of millions of individuals choosing how to allocate their limited resources among competing alternatives. These valuations cannot be observed directly or aggregated mechanically, they emerge only through the voluntary exchange process. Government intervention necessarily substitutes political preferences for consumer preferences. When policymakers decide that society needs more education, healthcare, or renewable energy, they override the choices that individuals would make voluntarily. This substitution might be justified if government officials had access to superior knowledge about individual welfare, but they don't. They have political incentives to serve concentrated interest groups rather than dispersed consumer interests. The market process, though imperfect, provides the only practical mechanism for coordinating human action in complex modern economies. Chapter 7: The Austrian Alternative that Predicts and Prevents Crises. While Keynesian economics struggles to explain economic crises after they occur, Austrian theory provides logical framework for both predicting and preventing them. This predictive power doesn't stem from mathematical models or statistical correlations, but from understanding the logical structure of human action and market processes. Austrian business cycle theory explains why economic crises are inevitable consequences of government intervention rather than mysterious failures of free markets. When central banks artificially lower interest rates, they disrupt the natural coordination between saving and investment that maintains economic equilibrium. Entrepreneurs respond to false price signals by undertaking investments that appear profitable only because of cheap artificial credit. This process is completely predictable once you understand the logic involved. Artificial credit expansion must create malinvestment because it separates investment decisions from genuine time preferences expressed through voluntary saving. The eventual correction is equally inevitable because economic reality cannot be permanently suppressed by monetary manipulation. I predicted the Great Depression precisely because I understood this logic. Throughout the 1920s, while most economists celebrated American prosperity, I warned that Federal Reserve credit expansion was creating unsustainable boom conditions. The 1929 crash and subsequent depression weren't surprising market failures, they were logical consequences of previous government intervention. Contemporary Austrian economists have successfully predicted subsequent crises using the same theoretical framework. The dot-com bubble, housing bubble, and current everything bubble all follow the identical pattern of artificial credit expansion, malinvestment, and inevitable correction. These predictions aren't lucky guesses, they're logical deductions from sound economic theory. More importantly, Austrian theory reveals how genuine prosperity can be achieved and maintained. Instead of trying to stimulate demand through government intervention, we should focus on removing obstacles to production and exchange. Sound money prevents the boom-bust cycle by ensuring that interest rates reflect genuine time preferences. Limited government protects property rights and enforces contracts without interfering in voluntary market processes. The practical implications for American economic policy are profound. Instead of responding to each crisis with more fiscal stimulus and monetary expansion, we should eliminate the government interventions that cause crises in the first place. Abolish the Federal Reserve and return to sound money based on market-chosen media of exchange. Eliminate regulations that prevent market clearing in labor, housing, and financial markets. Reduce government spending and taxation to allow maximum resources for private productive use. This approach seems radical only because we've been conditioned to believe that government management is necessary for economic stability. But the historical record demonstrates exactly the opposite. The most prosperous periods in American history occurred when government intervention was minimal and markets were relatively free. The Great Depression, stagflation of the 1970s, and current economic stagnation all coincided with increased government involvement in the economy. The choice facing America isn't between regulated capitalism and socialism, but between genuine free markets and continued government intervention disguised as market economy. Keynesian policies have failed repeatedly because they violate basic economic laws. Austrian principles offer the only path toward sustainable prosperity because they align with rather than oppose the logical structure of human action. The intellectual battle between Austrian and Keynesian economics isn't merely academic, it determines whether future generations inherit economic freedom and prosperity or continue suffering under increasingly destructive government intervention. Conclusion. The truth that made me Keynes' greatest intellectual enemy was simple yet profound. Economics is a logical science, not a tool for political manipulation. While Keynes promised politicians they could solve economic problems through clever intervention, I demonstrated why such promises violate the fundamental laws of human action. The decades since have vindicated Austrian theory while exposing Keynesian failures repeatedly. Today's economic challenges, inflation, stagnation, financial instability, growing inequality, all stem from continued application of Keynesian interventionism despite its theoretical bankruptcy. The solution isn't more sophisticated government management but return to sound economic principles that respect rather than violate the logic of human action. The choice before America is clear: continue down the Keynesian path toward increased government control and economic decline, or embrace Austrian principles that align with economic reality. This isn't about political preference or ideological commitment, it's about choosing logical truth over comfortable illusion. Economic laws operate whether we acknowledge them or not. The longer we deny economic reality through Keynesian intervention, the more severe the eventual correction must be. The time for half measures and compromise has passed. Only complete return to free market principles can restore genuine prosperity and prevent future crises.